Hello, and welcome to the screencast version of Unpacking the New York State Bilingual Progressions for elementary schools. This information is brought to you by the Hudson Valley Regional Bilingual Education Resource Network, or the RBERN. We are a grant-funded entity of the New York State Office of Bilingual Education, and we provide technical assistance and professional development in the area of English language learners throughout the Hudson Valley. My name is Rachel Wasilewski, and I'm a resource specialist here at the RBERN. Today's session will focus on unpacking the New York State New Language Arts progressions. We will understand how the documents are organized after we unpack them. We will also understand how to best utilize the New Language Arts progressions in instructional planning. And participants will also receive a link to a planning tool to assist as you begin using this resource in your instructional planning. You can access today's screencast and related materials by visiting our website at www.hudsonvalleyrbern.org and clicking on Workshop Presentations on the left-hand side of our webpage. When you arrive at our site and you click Workshop Presentations, right here, this will take you to our Google Drive where we house all of our workshop presentations and the related materials. You can click on the folder Screencasts and then click on Unpacking the New Language Arts Progressions, Unpacking the NLAP, and that will take you to all of the resources for today's presentation. So what are the New York State Bilingual Progressions? The Bilingual Progressions, also known as the New Language Arts Progressions, or NLAP, and the Home Language Arts Progressions, or HLAP, provide a framework for teachers to ensure that students in ENL, bilingual education, and dual language programs receive scaffolded, standards-based instruction. Today we will be unpacking the New Language Arts progressions, as unpacking the NLAP is the first step to understanding how to use any and all bilingual progressions materials. The NLAP and HLAP identify standards-based student performance indicators for students at various levels of language proficiency. These resources help teachers provide all students with access to grade-level content, regardless of their level of language proficiency in English. Now we will begin dissecting this document together. For demonstration purposes, I'm using the Grade 3 document for Common Core Reading for Information Standard 2, or RI.3.2. You can look at the corresponding standard for your grade. For example, if you have the Grade 1 documents in front of you, you would look at Reading for Information .1.2. If you teach Grade 4, you would look at Reading for Information .4.2. I suggest pausing this video right now until all participants are looking at the corresponding page for Reading for Information Standard 2 for their respective grades, then restarting once everyone is ready to proceed. Now that we are all on the same page, I want to draw your attention to this yellow arrow. This link, bit.ly/RBERN-NLAP, will take you directly to our RBERN resource library where we have housed all of the New Language Arts progressions by grade. Please jot down this link as it provides a quick way to retrieve the progressions document for any grade level or standard digitally. And also be aware that it is case sensitive, so you will have to type rburn-NLAP in capital letters. So the first thing I would like to draw your attention to is in the upper left-hand corner. This is the anchor standard. Each of these New Language Arts Progressions documents contain the anchor standard in the upper left-hand corner. This is the same across grade levels, depending upon the Common Core standard that you are looking at. For example, on this document, the anchor standard is Reading for Information, Point 2. Determine central ideas or themes of a text and analyze their development. Summarize the key supporting details and ideas. If you look at the documents that you have in front of you for your corresponding grade, this Common Core anchor standard should be the same. Underneath the anchor standard, we have our grade level standard. So this would be the standard that correlates to your grade level that relates to the anchor standard. So for this demonstration document, we have Reading for Information, Point 3, Point 2. Determine the main idea of a text, recount the key details, and explain how they support the main idea. On the right-hand side, you see two boxes in the upper right-hand corner that highlight academic demands. Basically, this is just a restating of the academic demands of the standard. So when you are thinking about the anchor standard, the main academic demand across K-12 is to summarize text by determining main idea and supporting details. The academic demand on the grade level for grade 3 with this particular standard is to determine main idea and key details and explain how they support the main idea. This restatement of the academic demands of the standard will come in handy later as I show you how to utilize this document in your planning. Underneath, in the next row, you'll see language proficiency levels. These are the levels as determined by the NYSED or the NYSED that the student has taken prior to coming to your class. These levels correlate to entering, emerging, transitioning, expanding, or commanding, which basically mean beginner, low intermediate, high intermediate, advanced, or proficient. In this area that just turned yellow, you will see that it says, when acquiring a new language, using grade level texts and appropriate supports, students are able to. This basically explains that students need to be using grade level texts, but with the appropriate supports, which are highlighted below in the next following boxes, students will be able to do the things that are outlined below. On page 1, you have your receptive scaffolds, listening and reading. The appropriate listening activities and scaffolds for each level of language proficiency are listed in the next row. For example, for your entering student, a listening-centered activity that correlates to this particular standard would be to organize pre-taught words and phrases on a main idea web to determine the main idea of a text as the text is read aloud in partnership and/or teacher-led small groups. As you move throughout the gradients of blue to the right-hand side, you will see that for each language proficiency level, the scaffolds change a bit to correlate to what they are able to do at their level. For example, if you skip to the transitioning level, you will see that now it says, organize phrases and sentences on a partially completed main idea web to determine the main idea of a text as the text is read aloud in partnership, small group, and/or whole class settings. You can see the change from entering to transitioning would be that now students are not just working with pre-taught vocabulary. They will be coming up with spontaneous vocabulary in their own sentences and phrases. However, some of the ideas will be partially filled in for them on a graphic organizer. Underneath the row of appropriate listening activities and scaffolds for each level, you will now see the appropriate reading activities and scaffolds for each level. The reading and listening activities are usually quite similar. It's just that the listening activities will take place during a reading of a text or listening to a video or something that the students will be orally listening to. So for example, the reading-centered activity for entering says organize pre-taught words and phrases on a main idea and details graphic organizer. So they're doing a very similar task to the listening-centered activity, but now they're organizing that information onto a graphic organizer as they read. Underneath the appropriate reading activities and scaffolds for each level, you will see that there is a row of appropriate level of native language support. Your entering and emerging students still need to utilize the home language quite a bit. So it says that they can attempt these things in the new and/or the home language. They can utilize the home language in their work. Transitioning students, it says that in the new and occasionally in the home language. Now these are for the activities that you see above. Expanding and commanding says in the new language, which means that these levels of native language support are appropriate to use during the activities that are listed above. However, that does not mean that your expanding and commanding students will never need native language support, such as glossaries and bilingual dictionaries. So those are the kind of things that you want to keep in mind when it comes to native language support for all of your English language learners. Now we will look at page 2 for standard Reading for Information 3.2. In the top row, once again, you see the language proficiency levels, entering, emerging, transitioning, expanding, and commanding. On page 2, what you will see are productive level scaffolds, speaking and writing activities. These are activities where students will be producing language. Speaking-centered activities show appropriate activities and scaffolds for each level when conducting speaking activities. For example, when you look at entering, a speaking-centered activity that correlates to standard Reading for Information 3.2 would be to use pre-taught words and phrases and the previously completed graphic organizers, which were completed during listening and reading activities, to complete sentence starters that explain how the key details of a text support the main idea when speaking in partnership and/or teacher-led small groups. If you jump to transitioning to see how the levels change, you can see that the speaking-centered activity becomes use a word bank to explain how the key details of a text support the main idea when speaking in partnership, small group, and/or whole class settings. So as you go up through the gradients, the speaking-centered activities become less scaffolded, but this is not to say that as you go up to expanding and commanding, students may not need to sometimes go back to using transitioning, emerging, or entering scaffolds. You really do have to use your judgment as a teacher at times because the scores that determine these levels are composite scores, which means that students' levels in each modality may be different than their overall proficiency level. Underneath the speaking activities and scaffolds, you will see appropriate writing activities and scaffolds for each level. So let's once again look at the entering column. A writing-centered activity for an entering level student would be to use pre-taught words and phrases to complete a closed paragraph, which is a paragraph with some of the words missing, some of those pre-taught key vocabulary, that determines the main idea of a text and explains how it is supported by key details. So in these writing-centered activities, you can see what is an appropriate level of production for a student at each language proficiency level relating to each standard. Let's jump to transitioning once again. The writing-centered activity says, use a word bank and the previously completed graphic organizers to develop a short essay that determines the main idea of a text and explains how it is supported by key details. When you jump to the expanding level, you see that it says use the previously completed graphic organizers and teacher-provided models, such as exemplars, to develop an essay that determines the main idea of a text and explains how it is supported by key details. So as you go through the levels of proficiency, the scaffolds become less and the students become more independent. But this is a wonderful guide for you to use in your classrooms when you're trying to decide what level of production can I expect from a student at each language proficiency level. Underneath the appropriate writing activities, you will find once again the appropriate level of native language support for each level as they produce speaking and writing. Next, we will examine the last portion of the NLAP document for Standard Reading for Information Point 2. Every standard document is organized into the two portions we just reviewed and this remaining portion, which I believe to be the most effective portion of the document to begin using as you first start incorporating the new language arts progressions into your instructional planning. At the top of this portion, the grade level standard is repeated, in this case, Reading for Information 3.2, as well as the grade level academic demand, determine the main idea and key details, and explain how they support the main idea. Underneath the standard and the academic demands are linguistic demands of the standard. The new language arts progressions list the linguistic demands of each standard, meaning if a student is to achieve success with Standard Reading for Information 3.2, these are the linguistic features the student will need to learn from you. For example, for this standard, if a student is going to be able to determine the main idea and key details and explain how they support the main idea, this student will need to be able to identify words that appear throughout the text that identify the main topic. These would be repeated words that are repeated throughout the text that identify the main topic. They would also need to be able to identify and use transitional words, sequencing words, when, then, after, and most, to recount and explain key details. Students would also need to be able to use adjectives that provide details about the text, and they would need to be able to use their own words to recount following the same sequence as the text presents. These are the linguistic demands of this standard. Underneath the linguistic demands, some examples to address the linguistic demands are displayed. These are examples and ideas for teacher directions and modeling, along with a text excerpt. In this example, the teacher directions say, in a small group or whole class discussion, model how to identify related nouns in bold, salt, rocks, and water that appear frequently throughout the text. As you can see, these repeated bold words, salty, salt, water, rocks, rocks, salt, rocks, water, salt, carry a lot of the meaning and gist of this excerpt. If a student were to first start by identifying these related nouns with their teacher, they will then be able to begin understanding the gist of this excerpt. Next, the teacher directions say identify nouns, their associated pronouns and phrases in italics. For example, ocean, worn down by water, and goes into water, that also appear frequently throughout the text. So when you add those to the bold words, you will see that the student is now going to begin to understand even more of what the text is about. Let's read them. Salty, salt, ocean water, rocks, rocks, salt, rocks, worn down by water, salt into the water, salt, ocean. As you can see, when you begin to identify these linguistic demands in this manner, more and more of the meaning will become apparent to your students who are learning the language. The next point says to identify transition words, in this case being adverbs, with an underline. Much, when, or most, being that these words introduce new details in the text. And the last says to use own words to recount following the same sequence as the text presents, which is why it is important to identify the transitional words so that students are able to utilize them as a framework to recount the text in their own words. As you can see, when focusing on these linguistic demands, you will be giving your students many of the tools that they need to understand and be able to express themselves in English about content-related topics. Now that we have reviewed and unpacked all portions of the New Language Arts Progressions document, we will briefly discuss how to begin incorporating the resource into your planning. Please jot down the link bit.ly/NLAP-planning. Please remember that these links are case sensitive. This link will take you to an editable template that you can download, edit, and use at your own convenience if you wish to do so. This template was created to assist teachers in planning of academic and linguistic demands of lessons and units. This template is also a tool for making decisions regarding standards-based ENL instruction. The first column of the template is where you will write your academic demands for the grade level. The second column is where you can place the linguistic demands that we looked at previously in the New Language Arts Progressions document. The third column is where you will decide upon activities to address the academic demands of your lesson or unit. And the fourth column is where you can make decisions about activities to address the linguistic demands, which you can refer back to the New Language Arts Progressions teacher modeling and directions for ideas. Let me give you an example. Remember, this is the page that we just looked at, where they stated the grade level academic demand in the right-hand corner, and then underneath the linguistic demands of the standard, and under that, some examples of how you can address the linguistic demands. Here is a completed sample template using the same standard, Reading for Information, Point 3.2. This sample can also be found at the link bit.ly/NLAP-planning along with the editable blank template. This sample lesson and unit is about the life cycle of a frog. Under Lesson Unit Standards, we have included both the Common Core Standard, Reading for Information, Point 3.2, and the Next Generation ELA Standard, 3R2, that correlates to the Common Core Standard, RI2. Under Academic Demands, we have placed the academic demand as it is written in the upper right-hand box of the New Language Arts Progressions document. Determine main idea and key details and explain how they support the main idea. Under Linguistic Demands, we have written those also as they are written in the New Language Arts Progressions document. Under Activities to address the academic demands, here are the lesson or unit activities you have planned for all students to achieve the standard. Under Activities to address linguistic demands, here is where you can take information from the teacher modeling portion of the New Language Arts Progressions and adapt it to your teaching style. For example, the way that I would utilize that information is by using a yellow highlighter to model how to identify related nouns that identify the main topic in a reading passage, such as frog, egg, tadpole, froglet, tail, and legs. I would also use different colored highlighters to model how to identify verbs that identify the main topic, and also how to identify transitional words that show the sequence. Then I would underline in black adjectives that provide details, and I would provide sentence frames or stems in the classroom to help students explain the text and sequence, so that they can achieve the linguistic demand of using their own words to recount, following the same sequence as the text presents. Once again, I just would like to direct you to our resource library, where this presentation, this screencast, and all of the materials related to this presentation, including the editable template, are housed in our resource library. Once again, you can go to our website, hudsonvalleyarborn.org, click on Workshop Presentations, and then go to Screencast and Unpacking the NLAP. I would also suggest that you sign up for our mailing list when you go to the website, because we will provide you with a lot of updates about English language learners in New York State, as well as updated information about workshops that we're offering in the Hudson Valley region. We offer many workshops on L-related topics, and everything that we offer is free and eligible for CTLE credit. I want to thank you for joining us for this screencast of the New Language Arts Progressions. And once again, just to remind you, if you do need any assistance with this topic or any other L-related topics, you can email us at arborn@swboces.org or visit our website at www.hudsonvalleyarborn.org. Thank you.